Jake Brennan wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked out across his cornfield. 12 years. That's how long it had been since he'd seen another human being in person. Sure, he got supply drops every few months, and he could send messages back to Earth if he really wanted to. But out here on New Haven, a frontier world so far from civilization that most people forgot it existed, Jake was completely alone. And honestly, he liked it that way. The galaxy was a crowded place these days. Hundreds of alien species, thousands of colony worlds, trade routes crisscrossing through space like a giant web. Everyone wanted something from everyone else. Always talking, always dealing, always scheming. Jake had gotten tired of it all years ago. So he'd saved up every credit he had, bought a piece of land on a planet nobody else wanted, and started farming. It was simple work. Honest work. Plant the seeds, tend the crops, harvest when ready, repeat. His only companions were his cattle, a few chickens, and the wind that rolled across the plains. Most people would have gone crazy from the loneliness. Jake found it peaceful. That evening started like any other. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Earth never quite managed. Jake was finishing up his rounds, checking on the cattle in the south pasture, when he heard it. A sound like thunder, but wrong somehow. Too sustained, too angry. He looked up and saw something streaking across the sky, trailing smoke and fire. Not a meteor. The trajectory was all wrong, and he could see pieces breaking off as it fell. A ship, then. And it was coming down fast. Jake's heart started pounding. In 12 years, nothing had ever fallen from the sky on his property. New Haven didn't get traffic. That was the whole point. The ship, or whatever it was, slammed into his northern cornfield with an impact that shook the ground beneath his boots. Jake could see the explosion from where he stood, a rolling fireball that lit up the darkening sky. His corn. 3 months of work, just gone. He should have called it in right then. Should have contacted the authorities, reported the crash, let someone else deal with it. That was the smart thing to do. But Jake had been alone for 12 years, and old instincts die hard. What if someone was hurt? What if they needed help right now, not 6 hours from now when the nearest patrol ship could arrive? Jake grabbed his medkit from the barn and jumped on his hover bike. The ride to the crash site took 10 minutes, and with every passing second, he expected to see survivors stumbling from the wreckage. But when he arrived, all he found was fire and twisted metal. The ship, if you could even call it that anymore, was barely recognizable. It looked like some kind of transport vessel, small and sleek, the kind used for moving cargo that was too valuable to trust to the big freight haulers. The hull had split open on impact, spilling its contents across the scorched earth. Jake climbed off his bike and approached carefully, scanning for anyone who might need help. That's when he saw them. Not people. Not anything he'd expected. Eggs. 7 of them, each about the size of a watermelon, scattered around the wreckage. But these weren't regular eggs. They were moving. Rocking back and forth. Cracking. Jake froze. He'd lived on the frontier long enough to know that eggs this size, on a secure transport, being moved under what looked like military-grade protection, meant something dangerous. Something valuable. Something he probably shouldn't be anywhere near. The first egg split completely open, and a small head poked out. Even in the flickering firelight, Jake could see the iridescent scales, the tiny horns, the eyes that gleamed with an intelligence that made his breath catch. A dragon. 7 dragon eggs, and they were all hatching right in front of him. Jake's mind raced. Everyone in the galaxy knew about dragons. They were legends, myths made real. The most intelligent non-spacefaring species ever discovered, and the most dangerous. Entire civilizations had tried to domesticate them, train them, use them. Every single one had failed. Dragons were too proud, too wild, too aggressive. They couldn't be controlled or reasoned with. And they were worth more than entire planets. The first hatchling stumbled out of its shell, no bigger than a house cat, mewling pitifully. It was bleeding from a gash on its side, probably from the crash. Its scales were deep red, like hot coals, and it looked around with confused, frightened eyes. Then it saw Jake. The little dragon stared at him for a long moment. Jake didn't move. Didn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get away before the thing decided he was either food or a threat. But the hatchling didn't attack. It made a small, pitiful sound and took a stumbling step toward him. Then another. It was hurt and scared and alone, and it was looking at Jake like he was the only solid thing in a terrifying world. The other eggs were cracking open now. More hatchlings, each a different color. Midnight black. Ice blue. Storm gray. golden orange, deep purple, silver white. All of them bleeding, all of them confused, all of them turning to look at the big strange creature standing in the firelight. Looking at Jake like he was supposed to know what to do. He should have walked away. Should have called the authorities right then and there. Dragons weren't pets. They weren't livestock. They were dangerous, priceless, protected by about 1,000 different galactic laws. But Jake looked at those 7 tiny creatures, hurt and alone and afraid, and saw something else. He saw the calves he'd pulled from difficult births. The chickens he'd nursed back to health after predator attacks. The strays he'd taken in back on Earth when he was still just a kid on his family's farm. He saw babies that needed help. Jake knelt down slowly and opened his medkit. The red hatchling was closest, still bleeding from that gash. It watched him warily as he pulled out antiseptic and bandages. "Easy now," Jake said softly, like he was talking to a spooked horse. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Let's just get you patched up, okay?" The hatchling tilted its head, studying him. Then, to Jake's complete shock, it sat down and held still while he cleaned and bandaged the wound. One by one, Jake treated the others. Some were more trusting than others, but none of them tried to bite or claw him. They just watched him with those 2 intelligent eyes and let him help. By the time he was done, the fire from the crash had burned itself out. The wreckage was still smoking, but the immediate danger had passed. Jake sat back on his heels and looked at the 7 hatchlings gathered around him. 7 baby dragons. On his farm. In his care. The authorities would come looking for them soon. A crashed transport carrying dragon eggs? The Galactic Preservation Corps would be here within days, maybe hours if someone had picked up the distress signal. Jake should leave them here. Should go home and pretend he'd never seen anything. But the red one was looking up at him again, making that small mewling sound. The others were huddled close, shivering in the cool night air. "Ah, hell," Jake muttered. He started loading them onto his hover bike, one at a time. They didn't fight him. They seemed almost relieved to be picked up, to be carried somewhere safe. The bike wasn't meant for this kind of cargo, but Jake made it work. 3 trips back and forth, and finally all 7 hatchlings were in his barn, nestled in a pile of fresh hay. They curled up together immediately, exhausted from their ordeal. Jake stood there watching them sleep, knowing he'd just made a decision that would change absolutely everything. The first night was chaos. Jake had raised cattle, chickens, even a few goats over the years. But baby dragons? That was something else entirely. They were hungry. Constantly, desperately hungry. And they let him know it with high-pitched screeching that could probably be heard from orbit. Jake tried everything in his kitchen. Milk? They spat it out. Grain? Not interested. Raw vegetables? One of them, the golden orange one, actually tried to bite him for offering. It was the black hatchling that finally gave him a clue. It wandered over to where Jake had left a piece of raw steak thawing on the counter and started tearing into it with tiny, surprisingly sharp teeth. Within seconds, all 7 of them were fighting over that single piece of meat like it was the last food in the universe. "Oh great," Jake muttered. "Carnivores. Of course you are." He ended up butchering one of his cattle that night. Felt bad about it, but the alternative was listening to those hatchlings scream until dawn. He cut the meat into small chunks and watched in amazement as they devoured everything he gave them. Each one ate nearly their own body weight before finally settling down to sleep. The next morning, Jake woke up to find all 7 of them had somehow gotten out of the barn and were sitting on his porch, staring at the door. Waiting for him. When he stepped outside, they swarmed around his feet like oversized, scaly puppies. That's when it hit him. They'd imprinted on him. These dragons, these creatures that the entire galaxy said were impossible to tame, thought he was their parent. Jake spent the next few days just trying to keep them alive and figure out what they needed. He learned quickly that they were all different. The red one, which he started calling Blaze, was bold and curious, always the first to investigate anything new. The black one, Smoke, was clever and cautious, watching everything before making a move. The ice blue one, Frost, was surprisingly gentle, careful not to scratch Jake even when excited. Then there was Storm, the gray one with silver streaks. That one had attitude. Cinder, the golden orange female, was protective of the others. Ember, the purple one, was playful and constantly getting into trouble. And Shadow, the silver white one, was the quiet observer who seemed to understand things the others missed. By the end of the first week, Jake had a routine going. Wake up at dawn, feed the dragons, tend to what was left of his farm, feed the dragons again, do repairs, feed the dragons a third time, and collapse into bed exhausted. The hatchlings grew fast. unnaturally fast. Within 2 weeks, they doubled in size. Within a month, they were as big as medium-sized dogs. And they followed Jake everywhere. When he went to check on the cattle, 7 dragons trotted behind him. When he worked on fixing his broken fence, they tried to help by carrying tools in their mouths. When he sat on his porch in the evening, they curled up around his chair like a scaly, color-coordinated security detail. Jake knew he should report this. Should tell someone what he had. But every time he thought about calling it in, he'd look at Blaze learning to fetch, or watch Frost carefully herd the chickens back into their coop without hurting a single one, and he put it off another day. The problem was, dragons weren't supposed to do these things. They weren't supposed to play fetch or herd chickens or learn their names. They weren't supposed to recognize voice commands or show affection or work together as a team. According to every xenobiologist in the galaxy, dragons were solitary apex predators that tolerated nothing and no one. But Jake's dragons were different. When one of the cattle got stuck in a ditch, Storm and Cinder worked together to pull it out. When a wild predator tried to attack the chickens one night, all 7 dragons formed a protective circle around the coop without Jake even asking. They were learning, adapting, becoming something no one thought dragons could be. It was Shadow that first started trying to talk. Jake was working in the barn one afternoon when he heard it. A sound that wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a chirp. He looked over and saw Shadow staring at him intently, making the sound again and again. "What is it, girl?" Jake asked. Shadow tilted her head and made the sound once more. It took Jake a moment to realize what he was hearing. She was trying to copy his voice. Trying to form words with a throat not designed for human speech. Over the next few weeks, all 7 of them started doing it. They couldn't quite manage words, but they learned to make different sounds for different things. A specific chirp meant they were hungry. A low rumble meant danger. A happy trill meant they wanted to play. They were developing a language, and Jake was part of it. 3 months after the crash, Jake's life had completely transformed. His farm was now home to 7 rapidly growing dragons who helped with the work, protected the livestock, and treated him like family. He'd never been happier, even if he was going through cattle at an alarming rate to keep them fed. That's when the ships appeared in orbit. Jake saw them on his scanner one morning. 3 vessels, military configuration, Galactic Preservation Corps markings. His stomach dropped. He'd known this was coming eventually. You don't lose a shipment of dragon eggs without someone coming to look for them. The lead ship sent a transmission. Professional, polite, but firm. They were coming to retrieve the dragons. They'd be landing within the hour. Jake walked out to where the dragons were playing in the field. They were massive now, each one the size of a horse. Blaze saw him first and came trotting over, the others following. They could sense his mood, the tension in his shoulders. "We got company coming," Jake told them, like they could understand every word. "Maybe they could. And they're gonna want to take you away." Blaze made a low, questioning sound. The others gathered closer, protective. Jake had spent 12 years alone, preferring solitude to the complications of civilization. But these 3 months with the dragons had reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Family wasn't a complication. It was the whole point. He wasn't going to let them take his family without a fight. The first dropship landed in his cornfield an hour later. The ramp lowered, and out stepped Captain Rebecca Stone, flanked by a dozen armed guards and a woman in a science officer's uniform. They approached Jake's farmhouse with the confidence of people who were used to being obeyed. Jake was waiting on his porch. The 7 dragons were arranged behind him, silent and watchful. Rebecca stopped about 20 feet away, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the scene. "Mr. Brennan? I'm Captain Stone with the Galactic Preservation Corps. I'm here to recover 7 dragon hatchlings that went missing 3 months ago." "They're not missing," Jake said calmly. "They're right here." "Yes, I can see that." Rebecca's gaze moved from dragon to dragon. "Sir, I don't know how you managed to keep them alive this long, but dragons are extremely dangerous. They're also protected under about 50 different galactic treaties. We need to take them into custody immediately." Behind Jake, Blaze growled. Not a threat exactly, but a clear statement. The other dragons shifted, moving closer to Jake. "They don't want to go," Jake said. The science officer stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, dragons don't bond with other species. What you're seeing is probably just." She stopped mid-sentence as Frost walked past Jake and sat down at his feet, leaning against his leg like an oversized dog. The other 6 did the same, forming a protective semicircle around him. The science officer's jaw dropped. That's impossible." "Yeah," Jake said. You might want to update your research. Captain Rebecca Stone had dealt with difficult situations before. Smugglers who refused to hand over contraband. Colonists who didn't want to evacuate dangerous worlds. Pirates who thought they could shoot their way out of trouble. But she'd never dealt with anything quite like this. A farmer and 7 dragons who apparently loved him. Mr. Brennan, Rebecca said, keeping her voice calm and professional. I understand you've formed some kind of attachment to these creatures. But they're not pets. Dragons are classified as sentient beings under galactic law. They belong in a proper sanctuary where trained specialists can care for them. Jake crossed his arms. They're being cared for just fine right here. Sir, with all due respect, you're a farmer. You have no training in xenobiology, no understanding of dragon psychology or development. These hatchlings need. They need family, Jake interrupted. They need someone who treats them like living beings instead of research specimens or weapons. And that's what they got here. Behind him, Ember made a sound that was almost like agreement. The science officer, whose name tag read Dr. Lisa Chen, was frantically scanning the dragons with a handheld device, her eyes getting wider with each reading. Captain, Lisa said quietly. You need to see this. Rebecca walked over, and Lisa showed her the scanner display. These neural patterns, they're not matching anything in our database for wild dragons. Look at this. She pointed to a series of fluctuating lines. This is brain activity in the language processing centers. Dragons don't have active language centers. They communicate through basic vocalizations and body language, but actual linguistic development? Never been observed. What are you saying? I'm saying these dragons are developing language skills. Real, complex communication. Lisa looked up at Jake with something like awe. What have you been doing with them? Jake shrugged. Talking to them. Teaching them things. Treating them like they can understand, because it seems like they can. This is impossible, Lisa whispered. We've been studying dragons for 300 years. Every attempt to domesticate them, to teach them, to form bonds, all failures. They are solitary creatures. Aggressive. Untrainable. Maybe they're only like that when you treat them like monsters, Jake said. These 7? I treated them like family from day one. Never locked them up. Never tried to control them. Just fed them, kept them safe, and let them be themselves. Turns out, that makes all the difference. Rebecca felt a headache coming on. This should have been simple. Retrieve the dragons, file a report, move on to the next assignment. But nothing about this was simple anymore. Mr. Brennan, even if what you're saying is true, I have my orders. These dragons are worth millions of credits each. They are strategic assets. The government isn't going to just let you keep them on a farm in the middle of nowhere. Then the government's got a problem, Jake said quietly. One of Rebecca's guards stepped forward. Captain, we could stun them and load them onto the transport. It would be quick. Every single dragon's head snapped toward that guard. 7 pairs of eyes, glowing with sudden menace. Blaze took a step forward, smoke literally rising from his nostrils. The guard quickly stepped back. Nobody's stunning anybody, Rebecca said firmly. She turned back to Jake. Mr. Brennan, be reasonable. You can't fight the Galactic Preservation Corps. You can't fight the government. One way or another, we're leaving with those dragons. You probably are, Jake admitted. I'm just one guy. But you're gonna have to go through me first, and that's gonna look real bad when the footage hits the news feeds. Rebecca blinked. What footage? Jake nodded toward his barn. Been live streaming this whole conversation. Sent it out on every Frontier channel I could access. By now, probably a few thousand people have seen it. Give it another hour, might be a few million. Rebecca's blood ran cold. You're bluffing. Check your feeds. Lisa pulled out her tablet and did a quick search. Her face went pale. Captain, he's not bluffing. It's already on FrontierNet, Galactic Hub, even some of the major Earth news sites. The headline is Government Threatens to Steal Farmer's Dragon Family. I didn't threaten, Rebecca stopped herself. It didn't matter what she'd actually said. What mattered was how it looked. And it looked bad. Before she could figure out her next move, more ships appeared in the sky. Not military vessels this time. Civilian transports. Cargo haulers. Personal shuttles. They started landing in Jake's fields, one after another. The first person to emerge was a grizzled woman in her 60s wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit. She walked right up to Rebecca and planted herself next to Jake. Name's Ruth. Got a farm about 6 systems over. Heard someone was trying to take this man's family. Figured I'd come express my opinion on the matter. More people were climbing out of ships now. Men and women of all ages, all human, all wearing the practical clothes of people who worked with their hands. Farmers. Miners. Terraformers. The backbone of the frontier colonies. They formed a line between Rebecca's team and Jake's farmhouse. Silent. Determined. You folks need to leave, Rebecca said. This is official Preservation Corps business. This is frontier business, Ruth shot back. And on the frontier, we look after our own. Jake's one of us. Those dragons chose to stay with him. Far as we're concerned, that makes them his family. And we don't let the government just take people's families. More ships were landing. The crowd was growing. Rebecca counted at least 100 people now, with more arriving every minute. Lisa touched her arm. Captain, we have a situation in orbit. Rebecca checked her command tablet. 3 ships had moved into position above the planet. Not military vessels, these were old frontier defense frigates, the kind that miners used to protect themselves from pirates. Barely armed, held together with spare parts and prayer. But their weapons were powered up, and they'd positioned themselves between Rebecca's fleet and the surface. A transmission came through. Gruff male voice, thick with a colony accent. Preservation Corps vessels, this is the independent ship Rattlesnake. You're welcome to leave peacefully. But those landing ships aren't going back up with any dragons that don't want to go. Just so we're clear on that. Rebecca's second-in-command looked at her nervously. Captain, what are your orders? She looked around. At Jake standing calm and defiant on his porch. At 7 dragons who showed more loyalty to a human farmer than any dragon in recorded history. At 100 frontier colonists who dropped everything to defend a neighbor they'd probably never even met. At 3 ships in orbit that were hopelessly outgunned but didn't seem to care. This was spiraling out of control fast. Stand down, Rebecca ordered her guards. Nobody fires. Nobody moves. She walked closer to Jake, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You've got 1 hour. That's how long I can stall before my superiors override me and send in a full tactical team. 1 hour to figure this out, or a lot of people are going to get hurt over a bunch of dragons. Jake met her eyes. They're not just dragons. They're family. And family's worth standing for. Even if it costs you everything. Especially then. Rebecca walked back to her team, her mind racing. She'd followed orders her entire career. Done her duty, no matter how difficult. But standing there, watching those dragons press close to Jake like children seeking comfort from a parent, watching ordinary people willing to risk everything to protect something they believed in, she wondered if maybe, just this once, her orders were wrong. Lisa was still scanning the dragons, her scientific mind clearly overwhelmed by the impossible data she was collecting. Lisa, Rebecca said quietly, give me your honest assessment. If we take these dragons, put them in a sanctuary, what happens? Lisa looked up from her tablet. Honestly? I think they'll revert. Everything we're seeing here, the bonding, the language development, the cooperative behavior, I think it only works because of him. Because of Jake. Remove that variable, and we're back to standard dragon behavior. Solitary. Aggressive. Exactly what we've always seen. And if we leave them here? Lisa's eyes shone with the kind of excitement scientists get when they're on the edge of a real discovery. Then we get to study something that's never existed before. Dragons raised with love instead of fear. The implications for xenobiology, for our understanding of sentient species development. Captain, this could change everything we think we know. Rebecca looked at her watch. 53 minutes left. She had a choice to make, and whatever she decided would define the rest of her career, maybe the rest of her life. The standoff stretched into its second day. More frontier settlers kept arriving until Jake's farm looked like a small town had sprung up overnight. People pitched tents in his fields, set up cooking stations, and settled in like they were prepared to stay for weeks. The Preservation Corps ships stayed in orbit, weapons powered down but still present. Waiting. Rebecca had bought time by claiming she needed to conduct a thorough assessment before proceeding. Her superiors weren't happy, but they'd agreed to 48 hours. Now half that time was gone. Lisa hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night and following day studying the dragons, running every scan and test she could think of. Jake had given her permission, but only on one condition: the dragons had to agree to it. And somehow, impossibly, they seemed to understand what was being asked of them. Blaze had been the first to volunteer, walking right up to Lisa and sitting down like a patient dog. The others followed his lead. Now Lisa sat in Jake's barn surrounded by equipment and data that was rewriting everything she thought she knew about dragon biology. This doesn't make sense, she muttered for the 100th time, scrolling through brain scans. None of this makes sense. Jake brought her a cup of coffee. He'd been surprisingly hospitable to the woman who'd come to take away his family. What doesn't make sense? All of it. Lisa gestured at her screens. Look at this. This is a scan of Blaze's brain. See these neural pathways? They're forming connections that wild dragons never develop. Social bonding structures, advanced problem-solving centers, emotional regulation. It's like watching a completely different species evolve in real time. Maybe that's exactly what's happening, Jake said. Lisa looked up at him. What do you mean? Well, think about it. Every dragon the galaxy's ever studied, where did they come from? Wild populations. Dragons that grew up alone, fighting for survival, treating every other creature as either prey or threat. Right? Yes, but that's their nature. Is it? Jake interrupted gently. Or is it just what happens when a species grows up in constant danger with no one to trust? You ever study Earth animals? Wolves, for example. Wild wolves can be dangerous, aggressive. But take a wolf pup, raise it with love and structure, and you get a dog. Same species, completely different behavior, all because of how they are raised. Lisa stared at him. Dragons aren't dogs, Mr. Brennan. No, they're smarter. Which means the impact of their upbringing should be even stronger. Jake scratched Frost behind the horns, and the dragon made a contented rumbling sound. These 7 never knew a world where they had to fight to survive. From the moment they hatched, they had food, safety, and someone who cared about them. They didn't develop survival instincts for a hostile world because their world wasn't hostile. Lisa's hands were shaking slightly as she pulled up more data. If you're right, if environment and upbringing can fundamentally alter dragon psychology, do you have any idea what that means? It means the galaxy's been doing it wrong for 300 years. It means we've been creating the very problem we thought we were studying. Lisa stood up and started pacing. Every dragon we've ever captured, every attempt at domestication, we approached them as dangerous animals that needed to be controlled. Cages. Restraints. Dominance-based training. We created fear and aggression, then pointed to that fear and aggression as proof that dragons couldn't be tamed. She pulled up historical records on her tablet. Look at this. This is from the Vexian Empire's attempt to weaponize dragons 200 years ago. They took eggs from wild populations, hatched them in captivity, and tried to train them using punishment and reward. Every single dragon became violently unstable within months. The project was abandoned after 17 handlers were killed. What happened to the dragons? Jake asked quietly. Released back into the wild. They were considered too dangerous to keep. Lisa's face went pale. Oh my God. We traumatized them and then used that trauma as evidence of their nature. We've been perpetuating a cycle for centuries. Jake nodded slowly. So what happens when you break the cycle? When you give them something different? Lisa looked at the 7 dragons lounging around the barn. Storm was playing with a ball, tossing it to Cinder who would catch it and toss it back. Shadow was helping Ember untangle herself from some rope. Blaze was watching over all of them like a responsible older sibling. You get this, Lisa whispered. You get family. Rebecca walked into the barn, her face tense. Lisa, I need that report. Command is pushing for a decision. Captain, you need to see this. Lisa pulled up a comparison chart. This is a standard dragon brain scan from our database. And this is Smoke's scan from this morning. The difference is, it's like comparing a human child raised in isolation versus one raised in a loving home. The neural development is completely different. Rebecca studied the scans. She'd led the Preservation Corps Dragon Division for 5 years. She'd seen dozens of dragons in sanctuaries, studied all the literature, followed all the protocols. And she'd never seen anything like what she was seeing now. How is this possible? She asked. Because Mr. Brennan did something no one else has ever tried, Lisa said. He treated them like they were already good instead of trying to prevent them from being bad. He trusted them, so they learned to be trustworthy. He showed them love, so they learned to love back. Rebecca walked over to where Jake sat with Frost. The dragon watched her approach but didn't move away. Up close, Rebecca could see the intelligence in those eyes. The awareness. The emotion. May I? She asked Jake, hand extended toward Frost. Ask her, not me. Rebecca looked at the dragon. Frost? Can I touch you? The dragon tilted her head, considering. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her snout against Rebecca's palm. The scales were warm, smooth. Frost made a soft sound, almost like a cat's purr. Something in Rebecca's chest cracked open. She'd spent 5 years treating dragons like problems to be managed. Threats to be contained. She'd never once considered treating one like this. Lisa, Rebecca said, her voice rough. If we take them to a sanctuary, what happens? Lisa didn't hesitate. They'll be separated. Standard protocol for dragon management, keep them isolated to prevent territorial aggression. They'll be studied, tested, trained using conventional methods. And based on everything I'm seeing in this data, they'll regress. Without Jake, without this family structure they've built, they'll become exactly what every other captive dragon becomes. Fearful. Aggressive. Alone. And if we leave them here, then we have a chance to learn something revolutionary. Not just about dragons, but about how intelligent species develop. About the impact of environment on biology. Lisa's voice got stronger. Captain, this could change how we approach every first contact situation. Every conservation effort. Every attempt to understand non-human intelligence. What Jake's done here isn't just important for dragons. It's important for the entire galaxy. Rebecca looked around the barn. At the data that proved the impossible. At the dragons who'd chosen love over instinct. At the farmer who'd somehow understood what the galaxy's best scientists had missed. Her communicator buzzed. Message from command. They wanted her decision within the hour. Lisa, I need you to compile everything. All your scans, all your findings, all of it. Make it airtight. You're going to recommend we leave them? I'm going to recommend something that'll probably get me fired, Rebecca said. But first, I need you to help me understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Because if I'm going to throw away my career, I'm going to make sure it's for something that matters. Jake had been quiet during the whole exchange. Now he spoke up. Captain Stone, I appreciate what you're trying to do. But you should know, even if your bosses say no, even if you have to follow orders, we're not backing down. These people out there? He gestured toward the fields full of frontier settlers. They didn't come here for me. They came here because this is about something bigger. It's about whether the government gets to decide what's best for everyone, or whether people have the right to choose their own families. Rebecca met his eyes. I know. That's what scares me. Because if this goes wrong, a lot of good people are going to get hurt. Then help us make sure it goes right. Lisa was frantically compiling data, muttering to herself as she worked. Rebecca watched her, watched the dragons, watched Jake sitting calm and certain in the middle of a situation that could explode into violence at any moment. And she made her choice. Get me a direct line to the Galactic Council, Rebecca told her communications officer. Not command. Not the Corps. The Council itself. Her officer's eyes went wide. Captain, that's completely outside the chain of command. I know what it is. Do it anyway. The Galactic Council chamber was a place where species from across known space gathered to make decisions that affected trillions of lives. It was formal, ancient, and moved with the speed of continental drift. Getting them to convene an emergency session was nearly impossible. Rebecca managed it in 6 hours. She'd bypassed every protocol, pulled every favor she'd earned in 15 years of service, and sent Lisa's data directly to 3 council members she knew personally. The scans, the brain activity readings, the footage of Jake and his dragons, all of it went straight to the top. The response came faster than anyone expected. The council wanted to see for themselves. 2 days later, Jake's farm hosted the strangest gathering in frontier history. On one side, frontier settlers still camped in the fields, now numbering over 500. On the other, a council delegation including representatives from 7 major species, along with their security details and scientific advisors. In the middle, Jake stood with 7 dragons who were now the size of horses and still growing. The council's lead representative was an elderly Thalaxian named Keeper of Ancient Truths, a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a philosopher. Its translation device rendered its clicking speech into perfect English. This human claims to have domesticated dragons. Multiple species have tried this. All have failed. Why should we believe you are different? Jake shrugged. I didn't domesticate them. I just raised them. There's a difference. Explain. Domestication is about control. Making something do what you want. I never tried to control them. I just gave them food, shelter, and treated them like family. They decided on their own to stick around. Keeper of Ancient Truths turned its compound eyes toward the dragons. These creatures chose to remain with you? They are not compelled or restrained in any way. Watch. Jake walked toward the edge of his property, about 100 yards away. The dragons followed him. Then he stopped and called out. Blaze, go wait by the barn. The red dragon looked at Jake, then at the barn. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Then Blaze turned and walked to the barn, sitting down exactly where Jake had indicated. Storm, Frost, go check on the cattle in the south field. The gray and blue dragons loped off toward the southern pasture. The rest of you, stay here. The remaining 4 dragons settled down where they were, watching Jake attentively. A council scientist, a crystalline being whose species Jake couldn't identify, made a sound of disbelief. They understand complex verbal commands. This is unprecedented. They understand a lot more than that, Lisa said. She'd been invited to present her findings directly to the council. Over the past week, I've documented cognitive development that shouldn't be possible. These dragons are developing language processing abilities, advanced emotional intelligence, and social structures that wild dragons never exhibit. And it's all because of how they were raised. She pulled up holographic displays showing the brain scans, the behavioral studies, the comparisons to wild dragons. The council members leaned in, their various forms of attention focused on the data. For 300 years, we've believed dragons were solitary, aggressive, impossible to integrate into civilized society, Lisa continued. But we never tested that belief properly. Every dragon we studied grew up in hostile conditions, either in the wild, fighting for survival, or in captivity, treated as a threat to be contained. We never raised one with love and trust from birth. Mr. Brennan did. And the results speak for themselves. Keeper of Ancient Truths was silent for a long moment. If this is true, the implications are profound. We have laws, protocols, entire departments built on the assumption that dragons cannot coexist with other species. Maybe those assumptions need updating, Jake said. Another council member, a floating jellyfish-like creature, spoke through its translator. And what do you propose, human? That we allow anyone to raise dragons as pets? Not pets. Family. Jake gestured to where his dragons were waiting. And no, not anyone. It takes work. Patience. You have to actually care about them as individuals. Most people probably aren't cut out for it. But some are. And those people should have the chance. The council members conferred among themselves in a mix of languages. Jake couldn't follow most of it, but he caught the tone. Some were intrigued. Others were skeptical. A few seemed openly hostile to the idea of changing policies that had been in place for centuries. Finally, Keeper of Ancient Truths spoke again. A demonstration. We would see these dragons perform complex tasks without coercion. Jake nodded. Fair enough. What do you want to see? Something that requires cooperation. Problem solving. Intelligence beyond simple obedience. Jake thought for a moment, then walked to his equipment shed. He pulled out several pieces of farming machinery and arranged them in a specific pattern. Then he set up barriers, created a makeshift obstacle course, and placed a target at the end. All right, he called to the dragons. New game. You need to get this ball, he held up a large rubber ball, from here to that target. But you can't fly over the obstacles, you can't knock them down, and you can't use the same path twice. Figure it out together. He tossed the ball to Blaze and stepped back. The dragons gathered around, examining the course. Then something remarkable happened. They started communicating. Not in roars or simple calls, but in a complex series of vocalizations, body language, and what looked like actual strategic planning. Shadow went first, taking the ball and navigating through a narrow gap. She passed it to Cinder, who carried it up and over a ramp. Cinder tossed it to Ember, who caught it mid-air and landed on a platform. One by one, they moved the ball through the course, each dragon taking a different route, working together to solve the puzzle. When Storm finally placed the ball on the target, all 7 dragons made a triumphant sound that was eerily close to cheering. The council's scientist was frantically taking readings. Impossible. The level of coordination, the communication complexity, the problem-solving ability, this is approaching human-level cognitive function. They are smart, Jake said simply. Always have been. The galaxy just never gave them a reason to show it. Over the next 3 hours, the council put the dragons through various tests. Each time, the results were the same. Intelligence. Cooperation. Emotional awareness. Everything that wild dragons supposedly lacked. As the suns began to set, Keeper of Ancient Truths approached Jake. You have presented us with a dilemma, human. What you have accomplished here challenges centuries of established understanding. If we acknowledge this, we must reconsider our entire approach to dragons. Perhaps to many species we have deemed incompatible with civilization. Is that a bad thing? Jake asked. Change is difficult. Admitting error is more difficult still. There will be resistance. There usually is. But that doesn't make it wrong. The council members gathered for a final conference. Jake couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the animated debate. Some gestured emphatically. Others remained still, contemplative. It went on for nearly an hour. Finally, they reached a decision. Keeper of Ancient Truths addressed the crowd that had gathered, settlers, core personnel, media drones recording everything for galactic broadcast. The council has reached a preliminary ruling. Based on the evidence presented, we acknowledge that previous understanding of dragon psychology was incomplete. The dragons currently residing with Jake Brennan demonstrate capacities we did not know their species possessed. Therefore, we are implementing the following measures. The ancient being paused, and Jake held his breath. First, these 7 dragons will remain with Mr. Brennan. They have demonstrated clear preference for his company and show no signs of threat to public safety. Second, this site will be designated as the New Haven Dragon Integration Study. Scientists from across the galaxy will be invited to observe and learn. Third, we are establishing a new protocol for dragon conservation, one that prioritizes social development and environmental enrichment over isolation and containment. A cheer went up from the frontier settlers. Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. However, Keeper of Ancient Truths continued, this is a provisional ruling. Mr. Brennan will be required to accept oversight, submit to regular inspections, and allow scientific study of his methods. The dragon's welfare will be monitored continuously. Any sign of danger or mistreatment will result in immediate intervention. That's fair, Jake said. I've got nothing to hide. Rebecca stepped forward. Council, I'd like to volunteer to head the oversight program. I believe my experience with the Preservation Corps and my understanding of this situation make me suited for the role. Keeper of Ancient Truths regarded her with its compound eyes. You would abandon your position to work on a frontier farm. I'd be taking a new position working on the most important xenobiological discovery in centuries, Rebecca corrected. Yes, I would. The council conferred briefly, then agreed. As the official business concluded and people began to disperse, Jake found himself surrounded by his dragons. They pressed close, sensing his emotional state. Blaze nudged his hand. Frost rested her head on his shoulder. The others formed a protective circle. Lisa approached, grinning. You know this changes everything, right? You're going to be famous. Scientists will be studying this place for decades. Your quiet farm life is over. Jake looked around at the tents, the equipment, the people who'd be staying to study his dragons. Then he looked at the 7 creatures who'd crashed into his life and changed everything. Yeah, he said. I guess it is. But as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jake realized he didn't mind. He'd come to New Haven looking for solitude. What he'd found instead was family, and proof that the galaxy's most stubborn species had one more trick up its sleeve. Humans had a habit of looking at the universe's most dangerous, impossible, untamable creatures and asking one simple question, but what if we're friends? And sometimes, miraculously, the answer was yes. Within a year, New Haven became a hub of research and discovery. Other dragons, wild ones, began appearing at the borders of Jake's property. Watching. Testing. Slowly, carefully, some chose to stay. Jake's herd grew to 20, then 30. Other humans across the frontier started taking in abandoned dragon eggs, following Jake's methods. Not all succeeded, it took a special kind of patience and understanding. But enough did that the galaxy had to completely rewrite its policies on dragons. Jake never left New Haven. He spent the rest of his life doing exactly what he'd always done, farming, caring for his animals, and proving that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their stubborn, foolish, wonderful belief that anything could be family if you just gave it a chance. And in a galaxy full of species that had long ago decided what was possible and what wasn't, sometimes it took a species too young and too naive to know better to show everyone they were wrong.